the wreckage, and the wounded. The alarm pierced through the silence of Outpost Kairos at 0347 hours, dragging Dr. Elias Thorne from a restless sleep. He stumbled to the monitoring station, his dark hair disheveled, eyes struggling to focus on the proximity sensors flashing red across the screen. Something had breached the station's detection perimeter. Elias pulled on his jacket and grabbed his emergency kit, muscle memory from years of frontier medicine guiding his movements. Through the viewport, he could see it, a small craft, barely more than an escape pod, tumbling through space with wisps of atmospheric vapor trailing behind it like dying breath. The hull was scorched black, peppered with blast marks that told a story of violence. He shouldn't investigate. Protocol demanded he report unidentified vessels to the mining company's security division, wait for authorization, follow proper quarantine procedures. But Elias had stopped following protocols the day he'd requested assignment to the most remote outpost in charted space, running from memories that still haunted him. The pod drifted closer, its emergency beacon pulsing weakly. Through the damaged viewport, Elias could make out a figure slumped against the restraints, alive but barely. He made his decision in seconds, overriding the airlock protocols and extending the station's retrieval arm. 20 minutes later, he stood in his medical bay staring at the most unusual patient he had ever encountered. The woman's skin was a deep purple, luminescent in places, with an almost ethereal quality that reminded him of nebula clouds he'd seen from observatory telescopes. But it was her wounds that commanded his immediate attention. Deep lacerations across her torso and arms, some cauterized, others still seeping a silver-blue fluid he assumed was blood. Strangest of all were the scars already present on her body, old wounds that glowed with a faint golden light, as if her very flesh held memories of past pain. Elias pushed aside his curiosity and fell into the familiar rhythm of emergency treatment. He cleaned the wounds with antiseptic solutions, his hands steady despite the alien physiology before him. Her bone structure was similar enough to human anatomy that he could work with confidence, though her internal temperature ran significantly hotter than any patient he'd treated before. Her breathing was shallow, irregular. He connected her to his monitoring equipment, adapting the sensors as best he could. Her heart, or what he assumed was her heart, beat in a triple rhythm, a pattern that was almost hypnotic. As he worked to seal a particularly deep wound along her ribcage, her eyes fluttered open briefly. They were striking, violet irises that seemed to contain entire galaxies, holding depths of intelligence and pain. She tried to speak, but only managed a soft sound before consciousness fled again. "Stay with me," Elias murmured, though he didn't know if she could hear him. "Wherever you came from, whatever happened to you, you're safe now." He worked through the night, surrounded by the quiet hum of machinery and the endless dark of space beyond his windows. Outside, her destroyed pod drifted in the station's shadow, keeping its secrets. Inside, Elias fought to save a stranger who had fallen into his life like a shooting star. By dawn, arbitrary on a station where day and night were merely scheduled shifts, her vital signs had stabilized. Elias finally allowed himself to collapse into the chair beside the medical bed, exhaustion claiming him. His last thought before sleep took him was simple. Who are you? The healing between stars. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality aboard Outpost Kairos. Elias fell into a routine of caring for Zarella, changing her bandages, monitoring her recovery, and gradually learning the rhythms of her presence. She proved to be a difficult patient, restless, proud, unused to depending on anyone, yet slowly, like ice melting under a gentle sun, she began to soften. On the 4th morning, Elias found her standing at the viewport, wrapped in one of his spare shirts that hung loosely on her frame. The purple skin of her shoulders caught the light from a distant star, and he paused in the doorway, struck by how different she looked from the wounded woman he'd first pulled from that escape pod. "You should still be resting," he said gently. "I've spent enough time lying down." She didn't turn from the window. "Tell me about this place. Why would someone choose to live in such isolation?" Elias moved to stand beside her, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "I was chief medical officer on a colony ship. We were carrying 10,000 people to a new settlement when a plague broke out in the cryogenic systems. The company wanted me to follow containment protocols, seal off the infected sections, sacrifice 500 people to save the rest." "But you didn't," Zarella said, understanding in her voice. "No. I thought I could save them all." His reflection in the viewport looked haunted. "I was wrong. My delay in implementing quarantine allowed the infection to spread. We lost 3,000 before I finally made the call I should have made from the beginning. Zarella turned to face him fully. You tried to show mercy. I showed arrogance. I believed I was skilled enough, smart enough to bend the rules and still win. He finally met her eyes. The families of those 3,000 people would disagree with your generous interpretation. She reached out, her fingers touching his jaw with surprising tenderness. We carry our failures like armor, don't we? Thinking that if we punish ourselves enough, somehow it will erase what happened. Her touch sent warmth through him, and Elias found himself leaning slightly into her hand. Is that what you do? Every scar on my body is a reminder of someone I failed to protect. My first advisor, who died shielding me from an assassin's blade. My younger brother, killed in a territorial dispute I couldn't prevent. She pressed her palm to her chest. Thousands of souls who burned because I was too blind to see the vipers in my own court. Zarella, let me finish. Her voice was fierce now. For 20 years I've ruled with absolute authority, convinced that if I was strong enough, ruthless enough, vigilant enough, I could prevent any tragedy. And still I failed. But you see me without the crown, without the empire, and you offer kindness anyway. The space between them had somehow diminished. Elias could count the subtle variations of purple in her skin, see the way her chest rose and fell with each breath. You're not hard to be kind to, he said softly. Something shifted in Zarella's expression, the imperial mask cracking further. I haven't allowed myself to feel anything beyond duty in so long. But here, with you, I remember what it's like to be simply myself.
A choice across worlds. The hour passed too quickly. Elias packed his few possessions while Zarella stood at the viewport, watching the Imperial ships draw closer. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself like a blade about to be drawn. "Tell me about where we're going," he said, trying to ease the weight pressing down on both of them. "The flagship is called the Constellation. It was my father's ship, then mine." She turned, a sad smile touching her lips. "It's beautiful and terrible. A city in space with gardens and weapon systems, art galleries and war rooms. 10,000 people living in a vessel designed for both diplomacy and destruction." Sounds overwhelming. It is. Every decision affects thousands, millions. Every mistake costs lives. She crossed to him. "Are you certain? Once you step aboard that ship, everything changes. You'll be the human who healed the Empress, thrust into a spotlight you never wanted. Some will call you a hero. Others will paint you as an opportunist, a manipulator who seduced their ruler when she was vulnerable." Elias took his hands. "And what will you call me?" "Mine," she said fiercely. "If you'll have me, despite the chaos and danger and impossible complications." I spent 3 years in isolation convincing myself I didn't deserve connection or happiness. Then you arrived, bleeding and broken, and you reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place. He kissed her softly. Not to follow protocols or protect myself from failure, but to help people who need it. You need someone who sees you, not the crown. I can be that person. It won't be easy. There will be members of court who resent your influence, enemies who will try to use you against me. And the war, her voice caught, I'll have to make decisions that may horrify you. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for real. Elias pressed his forehead to hers. We'll figure it out together. The docking alert chimed. Through the viewport, a sleek shuttle approached, bearing imperial markings that gleamed like promises and threats. Zarella straightened, and Elias watched the transformation, the vulnerable woman becoming the Empress before his eyes, though her hand never left his. Commander Vex waited in the airlock, flanked by 4 guards in ceremonial armor that looked beautiful and deadly. He dropped to one knee as Zarella emerged, and the guards followed. Rise, Vex. We have no time for ceremony. Zarella's voice carried absolute authority. Prepare a secure suite for Dr. Thorne. He'll be residing aboard the Constellation under my personal protection. Anyone who questions this answers to me directly. Vex's gaze flickered to Elias with new assessment, not hostile but intensely curious. "As you command, Your Majesty, though I should warn you, the court will have opinions. The court staged a coup and tried to murder me. Their opinions have lost considerable value." Zarella's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Dr. Thorne saved my life and asked for nothing in return. That makes him more trustworthy than most people I'll encounter." As they boarded the shuttle, Elias caught his last glimpse of Outpost Kairos, the small station that had been his self-imposed prison and, briefly, his sanctuary. He felt no regret at leaving it behind. The flight to the constellation took 20 minutes. Through the shuttle's viewport, Elias watched the flagship grow from a distant glimmer to an overwhelming presence, a vessel so massive it seemed to distort space around it, covered in lights that spelled out power and civilization in equal measure. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Zarella murmured, her hand finding his. "And terrifying." "Like its empress," he replied, earning a surprised laugh. The hangar bay alone was larger than any structure Elias had seen, bustling with activity as crews prepared ships for deployment. The moment Zarella's shuttle touched down, ranks of soldiers snapped to attention, their synchronized movement creating waves of salutes that rippled across the deck. Zarella descended the ramp like she was descending a throne, regal, untouchable, divine. But her hand remained in Elias's, anchoring her to something real, something human. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the assembled crews like wildfire. Commander Vex led them through corridors that gleamed with polished metal and crystalline displays, past officers who stopped to stare at their supposedly dead empress, walking among them with a human stranger on her side. Finally, they reached the Imperial Suite, a space that made Elias's entire outpost look like a storage closet. "The War Council convenes in 2 hours, Vex said, his tone apologetic. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but they're demanding immediate strategic discussion." "Of course they are," Zarella sighed. Then she turned to Elias. "I need to address my commanders, plan our counteroffensive. You'll be safe here. These quarters have security protocols that make fortresses look vulnerable. Go. Do what you need to do. I'll be here when you're done." She kissed him then, in front of Vex and the guards, a declaration that sent a clear message to anyone watching. This man matters to the Empress. When she pulled away, her eyes held fierce determination. "This war will be brutal. I'm going to reclaim my empire, and I'm going to make the traitors regret ever thinking they could erase me." Her thumb traced his cheek. "But after, when the fighting is done and the throne is secure, I'm going to build something different. A reign that has room for both duty and happiness, strength and vulnerability. A reign where the Empress isn't required to be alone." "I'll hold you to that," Elias replied. She swept from the room, commander and guards following, leaving Elias standing in quarters fit for royalty. Through the viewport, he could see hundreds of ships moving into formation, an empire mobilizing for war, led by a woman who had learned that true strength sometimes meant allowing yourself to be saved. Elias moved to the window, watching the organized chaos of military preparation. Somewhere out there, an enemy waited, conspirators who had tried to murder Zarella and seize power. The coming weeks would bring violence and loss, difficult decisions and impossible choices. But they would face it together. In the distance, a star system glimmered, perhaps home to one of the 1,000 worlds that called Zarella their empress. He thought about the future she'd promised, a reign built on more than just duty and sacrifice. It seemed impossible, idealistic. Then again, a week ago, the idea of an empress falling into his life seemed impossible too. The door chimed softly, and a service attendant entered with food and clothing appropriate for an imperial consort, a title Elias suspected he'd be hearing often. As he settled in to wait for Zarella's return, he allowed himself a small smile. He'd spent 3 years running from his past, hiding from responsibility and connection. Now he was at the center of a galactic empire, surrounded by danger and intrigue, committed to a woman whose life was defined by impossible burdens. It should have terrified him, but instead, for the first time since the plague ship disaster, Elias Thorne felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The war would come, the court would whisper and scheme, enemies would target him to strike at Zarella. The road ahead promised nothing easy or safe, but at the end of that road waited a woman who'd taught him that scars, whether glowing on purple skin or hidden in the heart, weren't marks of failure. They were proof of survival, maps of battles fought and survived. And some battles, Elias had finally learned, were worth fighting. Outside the viewport, the fleet prepared for war. Inside the Imperial suite, a frontier medic waited for his Empress to return, ready to face whatever came next. Together,